Every beekeeper asks the same question. What is the best Varroa mite treatment for your hives? And today in 2025, that answer is a bit more complicated than it was just 5 or 10 years ago. You have new miticides, you have forming resistant and shifting science. So today we're going to walk through all of the miticides and rank them from best to worst just for you. So believe it or not, Varroa mites actually still are the #1 cause for colony loss. It's actually kind of crazy because last year, this is how you know something terrible is about to happen, I swear, when it comes to beekeeping. Because right when you think you know everything is right when you need to be scared, because that's when the bees are like, hey, you definitely overlooked something. And for a minute there, I thought that we had Varroa mites figured out. But unfortunately, these little critters are able to evolve and become harder and harder for beekeepers to withstand and handle in their colonies. And a lot of that is because of what we do today in order to keep our food system going. But either way, the Bee Informed Partnership reports have continuously been able to show this year after year that beekeepers are still really struggling with Varroa mites. Part of that being that our miticides are not always 100% effective. Some of them, the mites are able to form a resistance to, while other ones you can only use during certain times of the year or in a certain timing with your hive in order to get the most out of that treatment. And truthfully, the most frustrating part is that a lot of the tools that our mentors used to use are no longer as effective as they were back then. One of those things being Amitraz, as the USDA did release that was the #1 cause for the huge die-off that we saw back in the winter of 2024 to 2025. So we're going to rank all of the miticides from worst to best in this video. And how we're going to rank these is we're going to go by efficacy. How well are they at killing mites? We're going to go for ease of use, because it really does matter, especially if you're treating a lot of hives or even if you're treating just a couple hives. We're also going to look at residues, because residues do matter whether you can use them with the honey supers on or if you have to have the honey supers off. And that's going to affect your timing, because what if your mites start coming up at a time of year that you have your honey supers on and you can't really treat. So that is something that's important too. We're also going to look at the resistant risk, since that is a huge factor now when it comes to mites. They are able to evolve and adapt and start to resist some of these miticides. And last but not least, of course, we're going to look at cost, because that actually still does matter, unfortunately. All right, so let's just get straight into it, starting with number 7, HopGuard 3. So there were 2 iterations before HopGuard 3, HopGuard 1 and HopGuard 2. It is considered organic as it is derived from hops. It is also considered a biopesticide, and it is safe to use during a honey flow, so you can actually use it with the honey supers on, which is great. But there is a lot of drawbacks to using HopGuard. It is said that in the previous versions, it wasn't as effective because HopGuard, it can only kill the mites that are on the bees. It can't penetrate the brood cappings. And one of the problems that they saw with HopGuard 1 and HopGuard 2 is that when they put on the treatment, it didn't have a good enough coverage across the hive in terms of how long the dose was actually active. So in the latest iteration of HopGuard, HopGuard 3, they did make it so that it will actually stay active in the hive for a little bit longer, and hopefully being able to actually target some of the mites that are coming up out of the cells on the bees as they're emerging from the brood. Now, some beekeepers have said that they noticed that this new iteration is a little bit gentler on the bees. They're not noticing as many dead bees on the outside of the hive or inside the hive, which is absolutely great, because if you guys have ever used mite treatments before, or if this is your very first video when it comes to mite treatments and you're a new beekeeper, some mite treatments are very harsh on the bees. They can kill the bees. They can, not all the bees, but some of the bees. They can burn some of the brood. They can partially hurt your queen as well. So all of these things are kind of tied together to kind of figure out what's the best thing for where you're at in your season at the moment. So because this treatment is a little bit messy, it's not very effective. It's at only about 50 to 60% effective. It doesn't penetrate the wax cappings, and it has a very short active window. That is why I'm ranking it at number 7. It's kind of like, overall, it's like a niche miticide that I don't really see a whole lot of like the bigger beekeepers using. It's mostly just like hobbyists with backyard hives that have experimented with it the most. Then sitting at number 6, we have Amitraz. Amitraz used to pretty much be like the king of miticides. Everybody loved it. It was pretty much easy to use in your colonies, and it used to actually be pretty effective. But now I'm ranking at number 6 because of the growing resistance that we are seeing in the Varroa mites to Amitraz. So we've used it for the last couple decades, but over time, since it is a chemical treatment, it is something that is man-made. The mites are able to adapt and evolve to it. I sat in a lecture by Dr. Frank Rankovic. I can never pronounce his last name correctly, so sorry if I said it wrong. But what he said was that when you put in Amitraz in your colony, there is a certain sequence in the gene of the mite that they have been able to develop to be completely resistant to it. Because the way it works is it's able to kind of plug into the mite as if it's like a key going into a lock. And that is how it's been able to kill the mite previously. But now some of these mites are now able to just keep walking around. And what happens when you use it on your hive and the resistance ones, they actually survive, they're able to keep breeding, and then you keep making new resistant mites in your colonies. So even though it has been something that's really easy to use for beekeepers, it is now stressed greatly that if you do use it, you only use it pretty much if it's like a worst case scenario, just because of this growing resistance. This is the first year that I have ever used Amitraz, and I already had resistance in my hives. I had Dr. Frank Rankovic come out and test all of my hives for Amitraz resistance, and surprisingly, he found that I had a 28% resistance already in my mites, which that's not very much, but still, if you think about it, that's going to be 28 out of 100 mites are going to survive each treatment. And if there's, say, 1,000 mites, that's 280 mites that are going to survive, and those are going to keep breeding. It's just going to create this vicious cycle until eventually a couple years from now, I'm going to have such a high mite load that my hives are just going to crash. And they're saying that is the biggest reason that we had the huge crash this year, like I had mentioned. At least one of the reasons. There's many other reasons that we had this big die-off, but that is the main one that the USDA has published research on. So Amitraz comes as Apivar. It comes in strips that you can buy that last for about 6 weeks that you normally would put in the hive. They have a newer version out, and they also have a newer gel that is coming out and is available to in only certain states. It's supposed to be a higher dose that you can just squirt onto like a tray onto your hive that will pretty much act as like a flash treatment and kill off some of your mites. So if you do decide to go that route, use it as a rotation. Use it as something you only use once during the year, but you also follow up with other types of treatments. Sitting at number 5, we have Thymol, also known as HopGuard is what it's commonly sold under. There's also Apivar. I don't have very much experience with Apivar, mostly just HopGuard. And there's a lot of pros when it comes to Thymol, but there's also some drawbacks too. Some of the pros is that it is organic. It comes from thyme oil, so it's a natural substance that it's kind of like a soft treatment on your hive. There's a lower risk of the mites also developing resistance to it because it is natural. I have learned that when it comes to miticides, if it's something that naturally occurs in the environment, it's a little bit harder for the mites to become resistant to it. It's only when we start making man-made chemicals that we put into the hives that we're starting to find resistance to. It also does not leave residues in your hive, but you still cannot use it with honey supers on because of the way that the vapors kind of go off into the hive. So the way it works is it comes in like a tub, and you take it and you pull it out with like a syringe type thing, and you squirt it onto a tray that you put into your colony. Now the label calls for 2 doses at 50 grams each, 14 days apart. And what happens is when you put the dose on the hive, it is really stinky to the bees. And so they want to remove it as quickly as possible. So when they start removing it, it gets all over their body. It makes them start to have a more hygienic behavior to clean off the thymol. But then in this, they're also cleaning off the mites, and the mites don't like the thymol either. So it helps lower your mite count when it's used across a broad amount of time. Only thing is it does have a slight negative impact on your colony. You will see a little bit of a setback. And also its efficiency completely depends on what the temperatures are. So the label states that you can use it between 60 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. But generally, you want to use it anywhere between like 70 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, because if it's too cold, then the vapors are not going to come off of the thymol to really get stinky, and the bees won't remove it as quickly. But also, the hotter it is, the hotter it's also going to make the hive because of how stinky it is, and can cause some problems. You can start to see some bee loss and some brood loss even if it starts to get too hot. And another con is that it also only treats the mites that are on the bees. It does not penetrate the wax capping, and that is why you have to apply it in 2 doses, 14 days apart, so that you're pretty much covering every single bit of brood that was in that hive from the moment you put that first treatment in, so that all the brood that emerges out can come in contact with that thymol and kill off the mites that were underneath the cappings as they emerge. Now, there are many beekeepers that love to use it. It's something that is really beneficial to use in a rotation. You'll learn that you don't want to stick to just one treatment. You want to rotate through at least 2 or 3 different miticides throughout the year, so that you're really getting a good kind of coverage of the mites that are in your colony. Not just because of forming resistance, but you're also thinking of each treatment has a specific place in the timing and year throughout your hive. I have heard some beekeepers experiment with the dosage. Some beekeepers like to apply it in 2-week intervals with maybe just a little bit of a lower dose. Other beekeepers like to apply it in 1-week intervals with still like a lower dose, but still the same. So it'd be like 1 week at 25, another week at 25, another week at 25. So you're still getting that 100 grams across an entire month. So it just kind of depends on your own operation and what you're kind of shooting for. Then coming in at number 4, we have formic acid. Now, this is my absolute favorite form of treatment, but it does have some drawbacks as well. Like I said, you guys are going to learn that when it comes to mite treatments, there's a give or take. Yes, you'll kill off some mites, but then with some of them, you're going to have some drawbacks and some other effects on the colony, because you're essentially killing a bug on a bug. Well, it's technically an arachnoid on an insect, so that's what makes them a little bit different, but it still makes it a little bit harder. So Formic Pro kills both mites on the bees and under the wax capping. Now, the reason this is my absolute favorite is because since it is able to do this, it is very, very, very effective, especially if you have brood in the colony. Now, one of the drawbacks is it does burn your brood just a little bit. It will set your colony back just a little bit, just maybe for like a week or 2. But when the hive comes back, she comes back strong. And the way this works is it comes in 2 pads that you put on your bottom brood box diagonally across from each other, and it forms a gas in your hive. You can do it 2 different ways. You can do the 2 pads, or you can do 1 pad for 10 days and then followed by another pad for another 10 days. That one doesn't penetrate the wax capping though. That one only will kill mites that are on the bees, but it's a little bit gentler, so you won't see as many negative effects on your colony. But the way that it works is it's coated in this like extended release paper that's supposed to keep the treatment from just completely flashing off and going off immediately into the hive. That would be very, very hard on your colony. It'd probably almost kill it because of how strong this acid is. But with that paper around it, how it releases it slowly is you have your strongest treatment on day 1, day 2, day 3, and then it starts tapering off after that. And it creates like a hotter environment inside your hive. So you're going to see a lot of bearding when you do have this treatment on. Now, this could be a good thing. This could be a bad thing, because when they're bearding on the outside, they're not really doing anything on the inside. But because it creates this hotter environment inside the hive because of the acid, it also has very strict temperature windows that you have to be in. So they really say that you shouldn't use it above 85 degrees if it's 85 or more outside degrees Fahrenheit. I personally, because I live in Michigan and we have a lot of humidity in the summer, do not like to use it if the temperatures are really above 82. And that is just for those first 3 days, because that's when the treatment's going to be at its strongest. And okay, you're probably thinking, well, what if you do use it when it's super hot? Because I've done this before. Well, what you're going to see is you're going to see a moderate amount of dead bees, and you're also going to see a lot of dead brood. Now, the hive can come back from this, but depending on the time of year, this could really set your hive back quite a bit and hurt the rest of your season. So you want to make sure you stay within that window. Because it also creates this like hotter and more acidic environment, the queen will also stop laying for about a week or so. So they kind of get a brood break in a way on top of this treatment. And I almost kind of wonder if that's part of the reason why it's so effective, because I can put this treatment on a hive and it will almost wipe out all the mites. It has at least a 90% efficacy every single time I've used it. One of the other drawbacks, though, of this treatment is it is known for killing off some weak queens. Now, I've only lost a couple queens to formic acid because I am very strict on when I use it in terms of the temperatures. But also, if you think about it, if it kills off one of your queens, it's probably because her pheromones weren't strong enough, which if her pheromones weren't strong enough, she was probably an older queen that was going to die in the winter anyways. Because since the formic creates this acidic like smell and environment, the bees, I think the bees lose track of her for a little bit. And that's why she stops laying. And that's why some of these queens end up getting killed off or requeened, because to them, it seems like her pheromone has dropped because there's so much of that formic acid in their hive. So when you do use this, you do want to make sure you have really good ventilation. You want to make sure that your bottom entrances are completely open so that they're able to fan out the formic acid as they need and still get in good air. You don't want your bees to suffocate on formic acid, that's for sure. But I will say, I think that this miticide has the least likeliness to be able to for the mites to be able to form a resistance to it, because it is the only mite treatment that's able to penetrate the wax capping and get the mites that are inside the brood. Because say that the mites started to evolve so that they spent less time on the bees. I've heard some grumblings that maybe this could possibly happen, but say that that is a scenario that the mites just learned how to do, because all of our other mite treatments kill mites that are on the bees, not mites that are in the cells. So formic acid is really going to be our tried and true, because it's able to get all of the mites that are in that colony, not just the mites that are outside of the brood cells at the moment. And since it is an organic acid, then that also helps out a ton, because it's considered a biopesticide, which also makes it less likely from the form of resistance to it. Next, at number 3, we have the oxalic acid and oxalic vapor treatment. Now, I love oxalic acid because it is super, super gentle on your colonies. Like, they won't even notice that it happened, and it will just kill all the mites. But it only kills mites that are on the bees. It won't kill mites that are underneath the wax cappings. So that is the biggest drawback of it. Because if you were to say only use one vaporization treatment of oxalic acid, it doesn't really have that big of an effect. If they have brood, it doesn't have that big of an effect on the colony in terms of killing off mites. You have to use it every 5 days for 4 or 5 rounds in order to really kind of target all the mites that are in that colony. So that can make it very work intensive if your colony does have brood. But say you're in a broodless situation, oh my gosh, does oxalic acid work great. It is organic. You can use with honey supers on. It's actually found in spinach leaves. So it's not good for you to inhale, but it's not going to absolutely kill you. If, say, you had it on your fingers and you touched your tongue and was like, oh no, I still have acid on my fingers. I've done that before. So, but it doesn't leave any residues in your comb or your wax. So that's what makes it so good too. It is great to be used during the fall or winter time when your hive is broodless, since you can just do one treatment and all your mites are just completely wiped out. And up until this year, so generally, oxalic acid can be used in your colony for any temperature. It doesn't have any temperature restrictions whatsoever. However, something that I've observed myself in my own operation is I have an oxalic acid vapor gun, and the lowest I can get the temperature down to is 420 degrees. Now I need to pull out the manual and see if I can use the buttons to somehow get it lower, but right now I can only get it to 420 degrees. And in a recent conversation that I had with Randy Oliver, I'll link the video up here, something that he had mentioned is that in his research, he's finding out that when you subliminate oxalic acid at a high temperature, what ends up happening is that oxalic acid starts to degrade rather quickly into carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and when it gets really hot, it can sublimate into formic acid as well. Now, he says that around like 290 degrees is a good temperature. It will sublimate a little bit slower, but we're learning that fast is not always effective. I know we want to go into a colony, put the gun in there, and do it as quickly as possible so we can only spend maybe a couple seconds on each colony. But what's actually happening is it's hurting our hives. And this is exactly what I've seen. When I've used it in the summertime, when it's very humid, and I have it set at 420 degrees, I see lots of negative effects on my hive. The queen stops laying, there's a lot of bee loss, there's a lot of brood loss, and the hive looks really, really rough for a few weeks. So keep that in mind. There's going to be some more research coming out from Randy, as that's something that he's currently looking into. So just keep that in mind when you are using it in your colony, especially when you're buying a vaporization gun. See if you can set it a little bit lower if the set temperature is, say, in the 400s or high 300s. And the last drawback, only because this is a little bit of a hassle, is you have to use a mask when you are treating with oxalic acid vapor. It is very hazardous to your lungs. It will make your lungs possibly collapse if you inhale too much of it. I've inhaled a little bit of it before. It does not feel great. It feels terrible. It is not good for you. So just a warning, definitely invest in a good mask that's rated for organic acids. And sitting at number 2, we have a brand new treatment. This is its first year of being out, its first season, and that is extended release oxalic acid, also known as Varoxan. It pretty much has all the same benefits, as I said, for the oxalic acid vapor. Just the only difference is that it's releasing a low dose across an extended amount of time. So it comes as strips. You can put those on your colony. In that same interview with Randy, he talked about that he's learning, or that he's seeing, that it's very efficacious to lay the strips on top of your top bars instead of putting them in between. But the label says to put them in between the frames. But the theory with this is that since it's a low dose for an extended amount of time, it's able to hit mites in brood cycles in your hive throughout an extended amount of time. It works for about 42 to 56 days. So as all of your bees are emerging and the mites that are on them, they're able to come in contact with the oxalic acid and pretty much get wiped out. Now, I wouldn't rate this treatment, though, as something that would be a hard treatment. So you're going to have your hard treatments and you're going to have your soft treatments. Your hard treatments, you really need to be doing 2 hard treatments per year and maybe just like 1 soft treatment. If you're a hobbyist, you can really get away with 1 hard treatment and a soft treatment throughout the year. And when I say soft treatment, I say what this does is it's pretty much maintaining your mite levels. It's keeping them from growing, but it's not completely wiping them out. So you can't use this as like your mainstay treatment. This is something that you would put on during the summertime when you have your honey supers on and you want to just help keep your mites low so that when you do your fall treatment, then you're not trying to wipe out tons and tons and tons of mites that have just been growing and feeding on your bees already for the last couple months. And number 1, are you ready? The most effective treatment that I would rank as number 1 and the cheapest treatment would be a brood break plus oxalic acid or thymol. This will wipe out so many of your mites. It is insane. I honestly wonder if it can possibly get your mites down to almost 0 in your hive. I try to use this wherever I can when I start a brand new split and say they're trying to make a new queen. The queen just got back from her mating flight and she just now started laying her first round of eggs. That's when I hit it with oxalic acid vapor. They have no brood. All the mites are going to be on the bees. So when I hit them with something that kills mites on the bees, it's going to wipe them out completely. Now, it can be a little bit labor intensive, especially if you don't have any designed brood breaks into your management at all throughout your year. Because you would involve finding the queen, caging the queen, waiting. You're going to have a little bit of a cutback because she wasn't creating brood during that time. But also you got to think, do you want the cutback later in the year when your bees are suffering because they're sick? Or do you want the cutback now and then be really strong later so that they go into winter doing really well? It is the most sustainable. It is kind of like a natural mite reset for the hive. And it's the highest efficacy combo that is possibly out there when it comes to killing Varroa mites. One drawback from this, though, is that it can reduce honey production only because they're going to be missing that bit of brood that the queen would have been laying during that time you're doing the brood break. But like I said, you got to pick your poison, unfortunately, when it comes to beekeeping nowadays. I would pretty much rate this way of treating as kind of like the gold standard, just because, yeah, you're killing as many mites as you possibly can. So it is important to remember that treatments are tools, but it's very, very important that you rotate them so that we don't form resistance to one of the treatments that we do have. We need all the help that we can get when it comes to Varroa mites because they are a growing problem in our colonies. There is no silver bullet, but if I was to recommend one treatment in 2025, that is the new treatment of the oxalic acid extended release. To have those on in the summertime is really a game changer. I've had them in all of our hives this year, and we've been washing pretty much 0s to like 3s at the most in our mite washes. Now, also, we started all these hives brand new. We made a ton of splits this year, and I've been keeping up on the mite treatments. So that might look a little bit different in your numbers. If, say, you were managing large colonies ever since the spring, you definitely want to keep up on your mites if that is your management because they're going to be growing rapidly. But which treatment has worked best for you in your hives this year? Drop it in the comments. I would love to hear about your experiences and what you've seen. All the info that we could possibly compile into this comment thread would help so many people out, not just me, but every single person that is watching this video. So if this breakdown is exactly what you needed, please hit the like, hit the share button, and subscribe if you want to see more updates about deep dives into beekeeping. But with that, I'll see you guys in the next one. Don't quit and be fit, and I hope your season is going well.